Hey, welcome back guys. This is Kyle with another video on creating a Node application with the sequelize ORM. Today we're going to be talking about user authentication. This is kind of a feared topic for people. I know this is a very feared topic for people. How to authenticate and log in a user. We're going to use the Passport library in order to do this. And there are different ways that you can authenticate a user. In all honesty, you could use what we have already built to authenticate a user. You could simply look up their password and send them back a JSON Web Token or some kind of cookie. We're going to use Passport to do something similar to that, but we're also going to create sessions, maybe not in this video, I don't know, but we also want to be able to do a couple other things. I don't want my users to just be able to log in using a username and password. I do want the ability to create users. As you can see here, it's flipping through the different social media. So I want to be able to create users based on Google, based on Facebook, based on Twitter, whatever I need to create these users, because I know for me personally, I like it when I'm able to log in, when it says log in with Facebook, because it means a lot of the times I don't have to create a new account and go through this is your name, this is it. I can just click sign up with Twitter, sign up with Facebook, and boom, I'm logged in. So a lot of people like this, and Passport is very good at this. The only problem I have with Passport is it's kind of difficult to understand how to do things, especially from their documentation. They've kind of abstracted so much of what they're doing away from you that if you've never done it before, it's like, how the heck do I actually get this to work? So here's how you actually kind of have to log someone in with Passport. App.js, or whatever file you have that looks like my app.js file, needs to actually initialize Passport. And then it's going to forward the request to a login route of some kind. That login route is going to determine, is this user logged in? So remember in the last video I said there's a Passport method called isAuthenticated. That's basically what this is going to do. And then if they are logged in, I want to destroy their session and create a new one. Now, full disclosure, this is not necessary. You don't actually have to see if they're logged in and destroy their session. The only reason I want to do this is because if you want to keep track of like when's the last time this person logged in, or if you want to create a new session every time they do log in, let's say that your sessions only last for a day. Well, you don't want someone to log in and then get kicked out like that, right? Because that would be really bad UX. So every time they log in, I want to destroy their previous session and give them a new one. And then we're going to invoke Passport authentication. And this requires using a strategy. So if these different things, Twitter, Facebook, local, Passport calls them strategies, and we can look at all of them real quick. So you can see all of the different strategies that Passport has. Facebook, they have an OAuth for Google, they have an Passport for Twitter. Those are the three that we're going to use. They do have a Passport that authenticates using JSON Web Tokens. So there's Passport OAuth 2. There's so much here. But we're not going to use any of those strategies at the moment. So let's just go to documentation and go back here. So as I said, we're going to use this strategy. And if they are successful, that means we found them in the database, they are an actual user. Then we're going to go back to that route that we were using before and probably return a new user or something along those lines. Who knows? But this does require us to create a bunch of different files that are very loosely connected to each other. It can be a little confusing. So the first thing we need to do is initialize Passport in app.js. And if we go to general, we need to go all the way down to configure. So this does kind of say here what you need. So let's go to here. Let's see here. That's the verify callback. All right, here we go, middleware. So it does specifically say in connect and express passport.initialize middleware needs to be, well, initialized. So somewhere in your app config, so app configure is usually something that happens in app.js. I don't use app configure. You don't need to use app configure. So we need to, let's see here, where is it? Right here. Okay. So we're not going to do sessions quite yet. So we can actually just say app.use passport and initialize. I'm going to copy this line of code here and go into my app.js file. Okay, and then right here is where we're going to passport authentication. Okay, so we'll initialize passport.initialize. Now, obviously, we don't have passport, so let's include that. Let's see here. We'll say npm I -- save passport. All right, so that's going to install passport for us, and up here is where we will require it. So let's say const passport equals require passport. Okay. So now we are initializing passport. That's all we need to do in this app.js file for the moment. The next thing we need to do is create an actual authentication route. Now, when it comes to user authentication, I don't really include it in either any of these services. You might be thinking that I would include it in the user service, but I don't. User authentication is something that the API gateway is responsible for. So, user auth. Okay. So this is something that the API gateway does. These guys should never be concerned with user authentication. As far as they're concerned, by the time they get anything, the user has already been authenticated. So I never want them to have to worry about user authentication. This is something that only the API gateway worries about. And you could even make an argument that this would be attached to identification, which happens before the user or the API gateway, but whatever. So let's go back to our editor. And let's see here. What do I want to do? Let's see. We'll go up to API gateway and let's create a file called auth routes or auth. Yeah, auth routes. I could call it gateway, but it doesn't really gateway to anything. So auth routes. And then I'm going to go into the user gateway, go up to the top, and I'm just going to steal these lines of code because I don't want to write them again. And then obviously module.exports is equal to router. All right, the only real code that we're going to have in here at the moment is going to be router.post. This will just be backslash, and then we'll have a function. So rec res and that. Okay. And this is going to be the authentication route. So say auth route just for right now. So the flow is going to be that they come to this auth route. So they've been identified already. possibly. Nope, they're not logged in, so they haven't been identified. Remember that in our, I probably don't have it up here anymore, user identification thing, if they're not logged in, then it's just going to call next. Okay? So they're not logged in. It'll forward it to the API gateway. This is going to go through user authentication and then probably just forward it on along to here, but or probably just return it. It's rare that I think I'm going to have something that logs you in and takes you to one of these services at the same time. This is really just its only job is to log you in. All right, so let's look at Passport. Sorry. So Passport actually does tell you what to do, but it's way up here. Okay, so authenticate. So we want to call this passport.authenticate. And in this case, they're using a local strategy. That's okay. That's what we're going to do. So, and we see that we call it before the rec and res, but after the route. So in our route, in auth routes, before this runs, we want this to run. So we'll need to require in passport, obviously. So const passport equals require and passport. All right, so that's going to call passport.authenticate. If this passes, then, or if we somehow get to this other piece of middleware, that means next was called and that we actually did authenticate. If it didn't, then we're going to throw an error and we're not even going to let it get to this. So by the time we made it here, if you made it here, the user is real and authentic. So not only does this user exist, but they had the correct password. So by the time we get here, now this is all done. And this seems really simple. And you might be like, well, okay, so you added passport.initialize and then you said passport.authenticate. But what the heck is passport.authenticate doing? Well, like I said, this is where we kind of jump around. So if we look here, we initialized passport, we requested a specific route, we haven't asked if a person is logged in yet, we'll do that in a bit, and then we invoke passport authentication. Now we want to move it to a strategy to verify a user. So if we go to passport documentation, I'm hoping flash message, custom callback, let's see here, local function error user info strategies. Okay, so here is how we configure strategies. More specifically, this is how you would configure a local strategy. So first off, we need to require these things. So I'm just going to copy them, and then I'm going to go into my browser, and I'm going to create a new file. And we are going to, well, actually, I might create this in middleware. So let's create a new file called just passport. And inside of this file, we're going to do this. So var passport equals require. So we're going to require passport and we're going to require a local strategy. Okay, and then if we go back here, we have a passport.use new local strategy. We're going to pass that a function. I'm literally just going to copy all of this and we'll go over what it's doing. Okay, so first off, passport.use. This is very similar to app.use. and it is basically just like using middleware. So I would think of this as the same as app.use. It's telling it, so when we invoke, where are my auth routes? When we invoke passport.authenticate, it's saying pass this request through passport, basically. And passport.use means that if we pass it through passport, we're passing it through this. We will also use passport.use and new strategy for Facebook, new strategy for Google. So had it gone through those as well, it might work for one of those. But for the moment, we're going to pass it through this strategy. Local strategy, meaning a strategy that we have written, local. This local strategy gets passed a function, and this is a function that runs when we invoke this passport.use. That's it. This is where we want to find our user. Now you can see here, find one, this is using Mongo, so I'm actually going to delete this, but you can see kind of what you're going to call. So if it's the correct password, you're going to call done, null, false, and you can send a message. Okay. If it is the correct user, then you're just going to call done and user. So let's delete all of this, and as we write it out new, it will make more sense. But there is documentation on this as well, so Passport talks about this. Let's see here. So we see the verify callback, which is basically okay. So the verify callback is that return done null that we just talked about. So if we return done and a user, then we basically succeeded. But if we return done null or false, or we return done in an error, which is what we are going to do, then we can be like, this user didn't quite exist. They need to try again. So the first thing we need to do here is actually find a user, right? Remember that what we're attempting to do here is determine who this person is. Now, here's where things can get a little bit tricky, because you might be wondering to yourself, where are these coming from? Right? So we have our auth route, which says passport.authenticate, and we have our passport route, which seemingly has username and password in there. And it's like, how? Where? Why? Well, this is kind of the thing that it tells you, but it doesn't really tell you. So if you look in parameters, it says by default, local strategy expects to find credentials in parameters named username and password. Now, I don't like that they use the word parameters, because if you're familiar with Express, you know that there is a params option. So you can say rec.params, but it's actually looking for the username and password in the rec.body portion. So it says here, the login form is submitted to the server via the post method. So we have the auth route on a post route. Okay. And using authenticate with a local strategy will handle the login request. So we're using passport.authenticate local. Now we're not going to do this success redirect or any of that stuff. Okay. Then it says down here again, by default, local strategy expects to find credentials in parameters named username and password. So what this means, is that when this is invoked, passport.authenticate local, you need to have two body parameters or two body object properties called username and password. Okay, so basically this needs to be written as let's say where we were using the Axios library, it would need to be written as axios.post and then whatever backslash. So let's say auth backslash, and then in the body, you would need to include a username and, I don't know, user and password, just like that. And then it's going to automatically look for these two things. Like I said in the beginning, this is kind of where Passport is doing so much for you. It's abstracting so much away that it can be a little bit confusing. So it's going to look for that username and password, and it's going to automatically inject them when it calls this function here. Okay, so now we want to find that user with the username and that password. So what we'll do is, we're going to do that separately first off. So what we'll do is we'll say const and user equals, let's require the user service, because remember we have the ability to find someone by their user ID, but we also have the ability to find someone by their username. So const user equals require, so up services user and user service. Okay. So here we're going to say, oh, let's see here. I don't have it open. Okay, it's over here. That's the auth service. Oh my god. I guess I don't have it open. So user service. So here we have find a user by their user ID. Oh, we're going to have to create another one, aren't we? So validate username exists, takes in a username and an email. I need to find a user by just their ID. All right. So this is where I'm going to end this video, because we're going to actually have to divert from this in just a second to create a new, or to find a user by their user ID. It's going to be almost exactly the same as find user, but I want to, well, no, we won't really need to test it because validate user already has the function in it that we're going to need. So yeah, we shouldn't need to test it. All right, so async, we won't need to end the video here. Actually, this is a good place to end the video. I'm sorry, I'm probably giving you guys whiplash. This is a good place to end this video and start up the next one, where we will create a new function to find a user by their username. I will see you then.
You said that you needed me like a car.